Hey everyone, today we have Adam Davies coming to the Fulton Career Cast to introduce himself and talk about his early career path in finance. Without further ado, let's welcome in Adam. Adam, how's it going?
Good. How are you, Drew?
Doing well. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Yeah. Crazy how fast the week is going.
It's going. It's
Yeah,
going.
yeah.
Good. So let's jump right into it. Adam, could you tell our students a little bit more about, who you are, your BC grad year, concentration, and whatnot?
Yeah, no problem. By way of background, so I'm a BC class of 2018 grad. So crazy to think that I'm now over 2 years out. That being said, I was CSOM, so Carroll School, class of 2018. Like I said, I was finance and analytics there, so co-concentrations, but also minored in environmental studies. And kind of by way of career motivation, something that I always wanted to do was kind of marry that financial and that environmental kind of feeling good about what you do when you go home at the end of the day. Um, so obviously my first path trying to go out of that was investment banking. And I say that in joking fashion because I originally wanted to go into a power and renewables group because I wanted to do deals with kind of energy conservation, things like that, being able to work on solar and renewables and all these cool things. And as it turns out, it wasn't really the path that I wanted to go further with. So I had done the internship, I had done that full time for a year, but then I ultimately transitioned to where I'm at now, a company called Malk Partners, which is it's by the Flatiron District. We also have an office in San Diego, a very small company. And yeah, so we do management consulting. It's actually ESG consulting. So that's environmental, social, and governance. And yeah, so I'm happy to dive a little bit further into that, Drew. I don't know necessarily how much more detail you'd like. What would you prefer there? But yeah, happy to dive in further.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit more about, what you do on a day-to-day and a little bit more about Malk.
Yeah, sure. So just to kind of caveat, it is something that is available to people right out of school. A lot of my cohort, among the people that had joined in July of 2019 when I had joined, were actually people that were fresh out of school. So this is definitely something that's free and able to apply directly into. I think we are posting right now at BC on Handshake, so it should be readily accessible. Um, so as far as what we do, environmental, social, and governance is kind of a growing space in the financial services industry. I think that there's a lot of value proposition, especially given everything that's going on with COVID right now. It's really looking further into, I mean, we kind of have a framework in which we look into several sub-issue areas that exist kind of beneath the E, S, and G. So the kind of things that we look at as consultants are things like social and labor conditions, obviously environmental management and climate change, things like that. But then also data privacy and security and diversity and equal employment opportunity. And there's a whole bunch of these areas that kind of exist beneath the E, S, and G that we will look further into. So kind of what's core to our business is private equity consulting. And private equity, just by way of a high level overview, is kind of when companies like financial sponsors will buy, hold, and sell companies that they feel have a really good value proposition where they can kind of improve their operations. They can take a bunch of money, put it into buying this company, improve that company's operations over time, and then go on and sell it kind of at a high value and a profit. And so where Malk comes into that is when they're looking to buy companies, when the private equity company is looking to buy a new portfolio company, they require a ton of diligence to be done to make sure, I mean, among other things, that there's kind of no skeletons in their closet, so to speak. So they'll bring in the Deloittes and the KPMGs and the EYs of the world to do the financial and tax diligence. And they'll bring in companies like Skadden to do legal and kind of litigation diligence. And now increasingly so, and luckily for us, they're bringing in a lot of companies like Malk to do things like ESG diligence. So as part of that process, we would be given access to a data room, which is essentially a comprehensive list of all the documents that really comprise this target company. And we will go through, and against our scope of all those areas I mentioned, social and labor conditions, climate change, things like that, we'll look at those documents and we'll see kind of how the company essentially manages their own ESG profile and where there can be incremental improvements that can be made. So that's kind of the high level overview. So in terms of the day to day, I mean, we'll look through a lot of those documents. We'll kind of assess, and we're industry agnostic as a company. So unlike banking, where you see things like it's technology, media, and telecom, and power and industrials, and there are these subdivisions and these kind of expertise areas, Malk as a company is, like I said, industry agnostic. So any deal that can come across my desk, I did a deal with a veterinary company not that long ago. I'm doing a deal with a software company now. So it can really, really vary. So the only thing that we actually exclude from our scope within ESG are those that do not have any inherent ESG value. So you think gambling, tobacco, weaponry, things like that aren't really justifiable. But anything else is on the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So essentially, we'll look through the data room and we'll get a better idea from the documents about how they kind of manage those ESG areas. And then we'll kind of put together a call agenda to then talk with the management of that company that we're doing diligence on. And because we serve kind of the middle market, smaller to mid-sized companies, the people that we're talking with, the management teams, are oftentimes the CEO and the founder of these companies, head of HR, head of operations, things like that. And because these companies are kind of their child that they raised up to this point where they're getting this investment from the private equity company, they really have a lot of passion and a lot of experience in the industry, obviously. So it's great to kind of talk with them through all those kind of ESG management areas that maybe that data room doesn't necessarily 100% address. And then from there, we'll kind of issue a report. And that report will be, I would say it can vary in terms of length, but then we'll go and we'll kind of shoot that back to the private equity company that's looking to invest in the target company. And they can kind of do with it as they please. They can turn it back through to their own investors to kind of check that box and say, hey, this is our ESG diligence kind of approach here. Here's how we're managing it. And here's how we're looking going forward. Or they can give it back to the company that we just did diligence on and saying, hey, we hired that specialist that you spoke with probably a week or two ago. They got some good insights, and here's kind of what we see for you going forward to kind of improve your operations in that ESG context. So that's the full scope. I'll stop there.
That's awesome. It's a lot to take in there. What would you say, for how you were prepared as, finance major, concentration at BC, how would you say your BC, your finance degree, how prepared you, and maybe some skills you had to develop on the job or that you need for skills that you use in this current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one thing, this is definitely just to kind of highlight, it is a mostly qualitative role. So contrary to the stereotype of, a typical finance job out of school, because this is in the financial services industry, you would think that this would require some kind of extensive modeling background, things like that. But if you think about the things that we typically look at, which are oftentimes employee handbooks, code of conduct, employee census, to get an idea of things like turnover, things like diversity composition, things like that. The Excel skills, it's a little bit of a softer Excel kind of environment. Versus what you might expect for a banking, no crazy modeling expertise. But I would say, BC, the original Excel classes that I took, freshman and sophomore year, those were definitely helpful in kind of establishing that baseline. But I think where the BC kind of education really shines through in my time at Malk is really kind of in the general business operations side of things. So kind of being able to understand the different kind of levers that you can pull as a business in order to be operationally efficient, the ways that you would kind of think about the supply chain and the ways you would think about managing your employee base, things along those lines, and kind of understanding the motivations behind a management team for doing what they do. Because as we're looking at ESG within our scope, a lot of it is really in the idea of kind of the vein of risk mitigation. You want to make sure that a company is taking the adequate steps to kind of go forward in their operations and have good business continuity and disaster recovery plans if there were to be a huge climate event. And if you think about companies that make a tangible product, you want to be very mindful of how they're running their supply chain, international inputs, things like that. Because if you do kind of keep that business operations sort of theme as you kind of go through and you pull on what you probably learned at BC, then it's able to better inform how you can consider these risk areas from kind of an ESG perspective.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned that, you guys are recruiting on Handshake and
Yep.
BC students to be interested. Are there any kind of specific qualifications or anything that students need to have to be hired right out of undergrad?
Yeah, so ESG is a generally pretty new space. In the broader scheme of financial services, it's really getting a lot of traction recently. Like I said, it's gained some ground from COVID, just through that inherent kind of risk mitigation component. But no, I'd say as far as like specific skill sets or qualifications or prerequisites, there's not one kind of boilerplate candidate. We're not looking for must come from finance or economics background with a 3.5 plus GPA or anything like that. We really try to be holistic and kind of operate outside of that scope because, like I said, since we're industry agnostic, people with different experiences and different backgrounds are really valued because you can kind of pull in your own interests and insights into any given deal that you're doing. One of my really good friends at the company, so she is a Georgetown grad and she actually is really, really interested in healthcare. And so she is kind of the healthcare SME, and SME is subject matter expert. And so we'll often go to her. If I'm doing a healthcare deal, I'll go to her and say, hey, what do you think about this as far as the risk exposure and things like that? So it's really important to kind of come in with this kind of varied flavor background. So there's no one prerequisite. But as a whole, in terms of consistent skill set, I would say it's generally kind of a qualitative mindedness to be able to obviously write effectively on the issues that you're coming across, and the ability to have kind of a good research background as you're looking through those documents and piecing together questions for the management team to kind of build out a more fulsome perspective of a company's ESG management.
Awesome. Awesome. And where can someone learn more about ESG or about you guys in general?
Yeah, so we definitely have a website, so that's available. We got the team page, and I'm more than happy to be accessible to anyone who's watching this right now. I think my email, to the extent helpful, it's adavies@malk.com. So if anyone wants to contact me there, more than happy to have a conversation on the side. But yeah, so we have our website, we have a LinkedIn page. I believe our application is open currently on Handshake. I believe our LinkedIn posting may have expired, but we may potentially reopen that depending on our pipeline, how it's being built out. So yeah, in terms of general ESG, I mean, there's a lot of thought pieces and white papers out there because it's a growing space. There's a lot of kind of different accounts and different ways in which you can potentially manage ESG and think about ESG. There's a lot of companies like MSCI, and I believe Sustainalytics was acquired by Morningstar, but I think they're functioning still within the ESG space. But they will try to quantify ESG and kind of put things into neat boxes with nice ribbons on them to be able to say, this company is an 84 with their ESG profile, and here's why. And I think that's a good baseline to be able to kind of get a better understanding of what kind of drivers affect a company's ESG performance. I may differ a little bit on the quantification side of things, because it can be fairly arbitrary to just assign a score to a company's ESG management, which is something that's so inherently qualitative. But yeah, I personally like a newsletter called Bloomberg Green, which I think has a lot of kind of resources there that can kind of help wrap your head around ESG things. So that's where I'd start in terms of getting a better idea of the general landscape.
Wonderful. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be on. Thanks for having me, and hope this was helpful. And just to reiterate, happy to hop on the phone with anyone who's watching this to talk more about it.
Absolutely. We'll make sure we have your email. We'll put your LinkedIn in there, but you said adavies@malk.com.
Correct. Yep.
There we go. Great.
Awesome.
All right, Adam. Have a good one.
You too.